Hello and welcome to Smart Money Simplified with Brent Mekosh. Brent, what's going on?
Here's what's going on. I've been getting questions lately about what is happening in commercial real estate, particularly around
Hmm.
office. And my answer is I honestly don't know, man. I mean, and it's for me, it's been a confusing topic because you hear some of these apocalyptic stories about $300 million buildings in San Francisco now being on the market for 40 million. But then also in my current building, where those of us are in the Phoenix area, it's a great building. We're very happy here. But I'm hearing now they're actually renting out for significantly more than what we signed on back in 2020.
Hmm.
And so it seems like there's a lot of currents and cross currents happening in that space. And so I'm bringing on today Andrew Cheney, and he is a partner in the Coppola Group, the Coppola Cheney Group, rather, with Lee and Associates. If you're here in the Phoenix Valley, you probably have seen some of his signs around. You probably know who he is because he's definitely viewed as a heck of a resource and a heck of a knowledge leader in this space. So, we're going to talk commercial real estate here, particularly around office. Because honestly, Andrew, I don't know what's going on, man. So I'm hoping that you're going to shed some light on what's happening in this market and what the landscape looks like right now. So with that, thank you for joining me. And if do you want to give a little intro or a little story about
Sure,
yourself and how you got into commercial real estate?
sure. You're welcome, Brent, and happy to be here. And hopefully, I shed more light than confusion on the office world. But it is, I think it's fun and it's exciting. It's interesting. I live it every day. I've been working across the street, catty corner from your building for the last 20 years. So with the Coppola Cheney Group, we have a team of about 10, and we help landlords here in Phoenix lease up their buildings. We also help tenants in Phoenix make sure that they get good deals from nice landlords in Phoenix. And then we do national tenant rep work. So I'm doing work all across the country right now for some clients that are based here and on the West Coast. And I focus more on the leasing than I do the sales. I do some sales, but I stress out every day on leases. And we do about 150 of those per year. So in the market, and let's just talk about what is going on in your building. And I'm first going to put it back on you. So you just went to Tokyo recently, right?
I did. Yep. I was there
Okay.
in about 2 months ago.
Okay, great. So Tokyo, along with say Chicago and London and San Francisco, is in all the headlines. It's on the first page or two of the Wall Street Journal, and how it's apocalyptic there, and buildings are going back to the banks, and the office is never coming back. It's terrible. And then if you swipe just two or three pages to the right, depending on the size of your iPad, then you see Phoenix is actually the fastest growing county, or Maricopa County within Phoenix is the fastest growing spot in all the US. And people are actually going back to the office and they like being in the office. And so that's one of the phenomenons going on. The other is construction pricing and the exorbitant cost there. That's been driving lease rates up and the value of your building, frankly, and my building, and what landlords are having to do now. So that is the one thing that I know. Interest rates are super stressful for owners and everything right now, but the biggest bane of everyone's existence right now is construction pricing. And so what happened is you had very, very smart people, 10 times smarter than you or I, 5, 6 years ago. They underwrite a building, and you have improvement costs that go along with a lease, and how what it's going to cost to build out a space. And 5 years ago, if you had a warm shell, you could build out a space for $50 per square foot. And that same cost today is around 110 to $120 per square foot.
What is driving that? Is this a labor force problem, or is this just a raw materials, drywall, and
It's
and
more. That's a good question. It's everything. It's inflation of materials. It is labor here in Phoenix. The building TSMC campus right now isn't super helpful. And I was talking to a contractor. He had an interesting concept, because we talked about Phoenix growing so fast. Phoenix has outgrown its trades, and so it's grown faster than the trade base here. And then you've also got the gig economy, and some people would rather be YouTube stars than maybe learn how to weld or learn how to swing a hammer. and you've got a severe labor shortage. And it's just been no fun for anyone, frankly, because landlords, you've got responsible, very professional, great people you've done deals with for 20 years, and say, well, I got 5 bids and they're all coming in at this price. And then so you've got to figure out, well, do I need that size? Do I want that building, that term? Am I going to stay here? Are you going to stay in the Camelback Road corridor where your rent is going to go up and landlords will pay for your building because it's well located? Or are you going to, go elsewhere, which is what, maybe not right in the prime financial district? So it's caused a real wrench.
Let's kind of
And
dive in on that a little bit. Now, I'll give you a little bit of our personal story in here because I think it would apply to what other people might be dealing with. So
sure.
obviously COVID hits. We don't need to beat that thing again because we all know what happens. Myself and my team, we never stopped coming to the office. But I do remember during that period of time, we were walking out to my parking garage, which used to be full. And some days my car was the only car there, and also Randy and Kayla and our team members here. But you've seen in my building, there are still very large tenants that have not returned. And so I'm guessing that they're just seeing out to the end of their lease, but we're not really getting new people that are coming in. We still, 3 years later, we still have a lot of empty, pretty large spaces here. How, from a pricing perspective, how is this Class A or your Camelback corridor here for those of us that aren't in the Valley? It's kind of where you want to be. If you're going to be in Phoenix, This is where you want to be. Where's that pricing power coming from? I get it with the TIs. I know that the improvements are going to cost more if you're re-upping your lease, but if the demand isn't there, why are we looking at prices increasing?
Sure, good question. And again, real estate is local. It's a cottage industry, and depending even what side of the intersection you're on, that can affect how much you're going to pay and the quality of the experience. But your building is actually more leased than you would think. And your submarket within Greater Phoenix, there's 100 million square feet of office product in Phoenix. The Camelback Road corridor is around 8 million square feet, and you're in one of the nicer buildings. So yes, when you're in there, and I know you're in there quite a bit, but there's other tenants in there. Yes, they may be giving space back, but the activity is actually pretty decent in your building right now. I track groups that are looking along the corridor, and on your third floor space, I know there's 2 or 3 groups competing for it right now. And what's happening is the front stage, financial services, fire industries, finance, insurance, real estate, folks like you and me, and ones with young kids, we're coming into the office and we want to be collaborating with our team. We're smaller firms, and we're in the office. So with Raymond James, maybe the back office portion or the back office portion of, say, Farmers Insurance, which their call centers up in the Northwest Valley, and they've got a 100,000-foot floor plate. That's changed for a long time, and those folks may not be coming back for a while. But our submarket is full of front stage, meeting in person, collaborating, value creation, really high intelligence workers coming in every day and collaborating. And you're in a small office, we're in a smaller office, and leasing 5,000 square feet isn't going to kill the business or the industry. But when you've got 100,000-foot obligation or potential obligation, you're going to think really long and hard about that, and you're going to see if you can get away with that for a while, of not going into the office, and maybe, hey, we can try working from home. So there's more demand in this area, and in also North Scottsdale, and that's where a lot of these financial services are. We've got the lowest amount of sublease space in these 2 areas. But then if you go to Tempe, where it's super even nicer office buildings, right on the town lake next to ASU, that's been the tech heavy spot for the last cycle, and that's where you're seeing the highest concentration of sublease space and tenants not coming back into the office. And so it's a different story down there. But where you're at, there's a lot of 40 to 6-year-olds, maybe more old school, want to come into the office. And coupled with the construction pricing, and the high barrier to entry, that's very, very tough to build new product in our submarket. So all those factors, and it's just a nice building. So that's where you get the price increase.
So here in the Valley and in Phoenix, and I do want to talk about what you see happening nationwide. And we're very fortunate here to be in Arizona, be in Phoenix, and be in this
We are.
economy that we have here. But are there sectors or segments of the market that are stressed right now? You mentioned obviously call centers, and I'm guessing, lower tier space where you're packing a bunch of cubicles in and people with their headsets on the phones. Is that where I guess the pain is right now in commercial real estate, at least in this valley?
Sure. So the pain, the way I think about it, the pain is in older buildings without walkable amenities. And so the old days of, hey, we're going to put 50,000 feet into this call center along the freeway, and maybe we have a food truck come along, 1 or 2 days a week, and there's maybe one set of bags out there. There's a volleyball court. That's not going to cut it anymore and make the juice worth the squeeze of tenants coming back to the office. So those that your highest concentration of vacancy would be in those larger buildings that were really more back office service center or older Class B multi-tenant buildings that just don't have a place to eat or drink nearby. And that's why we're spoiled. We have some of the nicest restaurants in North America, all nearby. We're close to the airports. That's why the Camelback Road corridor is doing fine. But it's really anything on kind of the outskirts of town, or potentially we talked about Central Avenue. There's been some softening there. The high-rise buildings, COVID, there's still some stigma there, but there's also just, maybe we don't want to go downtown and we want to stay closer to home. But it's older buildings that aren't well amenitized. That's where your stress is. That's where if you've got a loan, you're invested in a building that's built 40 years ago, not a lot going on. You're wondering, well, is this going to stay in an office building, or do we, convert this into medical, or, do we try to do something else with it?
Now, you mentioned TSM and to those outside the Valley, Taiwan Semiconductor, and it's just sucking all the oxygen out of at least construction and everything else. I mean, you drive up north and just construction cranes, and they're building a massive, massive chip foundry up there. And I think they've already announced they're going to double it in size.
Right.
Are you guys seeing, and it was kind of, it was an empty desert, but there wasn't a lot happening up there prior to TSM coming in. Are you seeing now commercial space, that's commercial office space, is being built up there to support what's happening with TSM in the north part of the valley, like new construction?
Good question. No, the new construction pipeline has virtually dried up in Phoenix. And so what's happening up there and a lot of other places is new tenants coming in are going to want either sublease space that's on the market still, or sublease space that's turned into direct space. At least right now it's still vacant, but there's still plenty of polls, particularly up there in that part of the market. So a new owner, you could build a new building up at the USAA campus, but they've got some holes of their own, so they're going to wait for those buildings and their other nice Class A neighbors to fill up before they build anything new.
Okay, so that there's empty, not empty, but they're not at capacity up there in terms of utilization.
Right. So you an idea for vacancy. Most markets across the United States, your equilibrium vacancy, say around 12-14%, because there's higher barriers to entry. In Phoenix, our 20-year average for vacancy is 18%. Okay, so some people and that's why Phoenix gets passed over by certain investors, because they just can't handle the high vacancy. I'm used to investing in Minnesota or Milwaukee, and it's 7%. So they can't comprehend that. And then you throw the sublease vacancy on top of that, so our vacancy gets closer to 24%. And so that's a huge. So this cycle is different than the last one. Last cycle, we were after the financial Great Recession. There was about 6 million square feet that was just had delivered, and everything's falling apart. So a lot of those buildings went back to the bank. There was major stress, major discounts. What's happened here is people learned their lesson. They turned off the pipeline a lot quicker. So right now there's 500,000 square feet under construction right now. It's going to deliver all this year. Next year, there's nothing in the pipeline. Maybe we build something in 2025. And so what's interesting this time is we're not so overbuilt is we're just under demanded right now. And our 20-year average for new construction is around 2.2 million square feet.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't realize we had nothing on deck for next year. So,
Right.
We're both happy we're in Phoenix. There's no question about it. I lived in New York City for 10 years prior to moving out to Arizona in 2007. One of the things that was amazing about living in New York is the fact that you hop on the subway, you're wherever your office is, and there's all the activities, everything else that you have in the city, and you're willing to pay a price from a tax standpoint because the taxes stink, quite frankly, from a standpoint of quality of life, and you just don't have space because you have everything else happening. Well, COVID and a lot of, and I would go as far as to say too, current leadership and most recent leadership, I think in New York City has sort of changed that city, and not necessarily for the better. Can you speak at all to what's happening in some of those markets where you've had people migrating out of, like New York, like San Francisco? You talked about our vacancy rates. What's it looking like in some Chicago? Obviously, for fiscal reasons, a lot of companies are getting out of there as well.
Right.
What are you seeing in terms of vacancy in these places?
Sure. There's two things going on. One is you've got these traditional gateway cities, I call them major markets of Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, where there's a big cluster, a big central business district, and everyone comes in from the suburbs and they go back in, and it's just a logjam either way. Phoenix is much different. We've got 10 different employment centers, and yes, we've got a downtown and central district, but we're spread out much more. And a lot of those, and the pandemic showed us that you don't have to come into the office every day. And if I don't want to commute from Long Island or Connecticut every day, I don't have to grind it out on the train for an hour each way, or from San Francisco and get stuck in Golden Gate traffic, and Seattle gets bogged down there too. So you've got that, and not to get political, but some of the more gateway cities are more liberal, and the not as business friendly. So those two phenomena have driven more people to southern states, to Texas and Florida, frankly, and Arizona. I don't feel like we're getting our fair share yet. Hopefully, more are coming, but it is a combination of the political environment, but also that big, massive commute there. And there's nuances to each one. I mean, I just did a deal in Chicago, and it's every industry is affected there, and folks just don't want to go in. There's certain safety issues, and then in Seattle, it's all tech. So when tech's booming, I mean, life is great, but when tech's not booming, man, there is, Seattle is on front page of CoStar. Hey, this market's really softening. So I'm doing a deal up there for a client, and kind of excited for the rate that I'm going to be able to get them
That's
for
great.
the next 10 years.
In Chicago is kind of an interesting one. I back in years and years ago, I lived in Chicago for about 6 months. I was rotated through there, and amazing city. And I was in Chicago last November for the first time in a while, and I love Chicago. It is awesome. But again, you have a situation here where you get a new mayor that just came in. People obviously were anxious to get rid of Lightfoot. She's gone, but then you got Brandon Johnson, whose economic report I think they put out was literally called "First We Get the Money" was the title of it. That was basically suggesting all these brand new taxes that all these companies were going to pay in order to fund whatever initiatives he wanted to pay for. But obviously, companies aren't going to do that, and so you have, and there's safety issues, as you mentioned. So people fleeing those areas. What do you see happening in a downtown core district like the core loop in Chicago? San Francisco has similar issues. What do you see happening with these markets in the long term?
I see real estate is cyclical, and I still think long term those cities are fantastic. And right now, yeah, it's tough in California. In San Francisco, some of the hotels went back to the lenders. Some buildings, more so in Chicago, will go back to lenders, just because it's not going to improve for quite some time. But then people will forget what it was like to go through the pandemic, and I think more people, as in turbulent times, people realize how much they do need to collaborate into the office. And gateway cities, much like New York. People wrote off New York, I don't know, late
Yeah.
70s, part of the 80s, and
80s,
guess
yeah.
what? It came back, and I do feel strongly that it is come back. It is going to come back. So if any of your listeners, your readers can invest in an office building in one of those markets for double digits per square foot, I'm all in. I put my money there. Buying one for near 80% top of the market, maybe not so much, but real estate is cyclical. People will come back. Those uh, political environments will change. There's a lot of factors that'll change, and it will come back. So let me ask you this, Brent. Do you still use Tide?
Yeah, you mean in terms of laundry detergent?
Yes, yes.
I do. Yes, I use the Tide Pods. I've never done the Tide Pod challenge, by the way, but yes, I'm a
Okay,
Tide
good,
user.
good. Yeah, but your mom probably used the Tide powder when she used to
Yes.
wash your clothes when you started doing your clothes. Okay. So people still use Tide and they're just using a different form of it. And they're always gonna, you're always gonna need, Tide in some form or another. And with office space and retail space for that matter, you're always gonna need it. The form may change and the way you use it may change, but it's always going to be there. Real estate's cyclical. So have hope in some of these gateway cities.
And what kind of vacancy rates are you seeing now in San Francisco, Chicago, New York?
In San Francisco, gosh, check 10 minutes ago. I mean, you're starting to get up in Phoenix numbers and then and beyond. And so certain areas you can get up near 30%. And that's troublesome. That's when at that rate, even with construction pricing going up, you're still going to have price decreases in there. So it's certainly not up to the 50% range and anything like that. But once you get up above that 25% range in any market, there's stress on rates.
So now here's a question that I don't have an answer to, and I probably should know. But in some of these more stressed cities, when is this debt going to have to get refinanced? Because we're in a very different. Because I know at least in the high yield world, for example, pretty much everybody refied in 2020 and 2021 that could, because rates were essentially through the floor.
Right.
And so when I get questions, what's high yield look like? And I said, like, depending if rates stay here, it's probably a 2025 problem into 2026, because most of that paper was like 5 years or so.
Right.
When does this become a problem for some of these now more vacant buildings that need to go and refi?
Now. So I don't know the latest $2 or $3 trillion figure of debt coming due in the next 36, 60 months. But the point is a lot's coming due. It's just starting to come due now. So what's happening now in the office world, it's more of, hey, I've got a refi here in a year and I'd rather not do that. So it's not going to be a fire sale, but I'm going to sell now at a notable discount and just get out of it and put my money in maybe industrial, multifamily, or something else. So I'm gonna do that, and then maybe this time next year there'll be some folks that they can't, or the building is too high a vacancy and they're just going to have to let it go. But for now you're having very few fire sales, and then there's more of, yeah, don't want to go through a refinance, or even I own my building free and clear, but I'm having these tenants that just went back to these banking clients that just went back home. They may not be back for a couple of years. And I frankly don't want to go through a release up and all the lease up costs with tenant improvements, downtime, paying huge fees to get these things leased back up. So I'm just going to sell it at a nice discount. So the discounts are starting to trickle through, but they're not really flowing through yet. But I think you are going to, I don't, Barry Sternlicht and I may have a difference on this, and he may think that it's just going to be horrific. I think there's going to be a correction. I don't think it's going to be as bad as the Great Recession, because our economy is still pretty strong. You do have people coming back to the office. We're not as overbuilt, and some obsolete product will go away. But I lived through the 2008. That felt a lot different than it does now.
And how big of a market? How much money are we talking in terms of office space that potentially could be in trouble?
Oh boy. If you were to look at the Phoenix office market, 100 million square feet, I mean, you could say that anywhere 20 to 50% could have some sort of stress.
Okay,
It's good
interesting.
question. I don't have that figure off the top of my head, but knowing that, there's only so many people who can, buy buildings out free and clear. But you've also got lenders that aren't going to necessarily want to take buildings back, and so they're going to do a lot more. And they're, at least right now, they're not failing, except for a couple. They're not failing, and so there's going to be more workouts and more. Okay, well, you keep it. We're not going to do anything better with this. So there is going to be some negotiating versus just this, waterfall of billings coming through, getting cleansed, and then bought for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah, I agree with you there in the sense that I think that also too, it's not really foreclosing any mortgage is very different than foreclosing on a giant commercial property.
Right.
And there's less incentive to do that if you can find a way to structure things and work things out. I think you'll probably see a little bit more of that. I will say I'm like you in the sense where I think that the tide is shifting a little bit around commercial. I think that people are realizing that in person, it's wonderful we can do this virtual stuff that we're doing, and I absolutely love it, and adds tons of efficiency to the business. But still, the ability to sit down across the table with somebody, whether it's a coworker, whether it's a client, collaborate directly, is valuable. And I think that there's going to be a desire to cycle back into that. So I'm overall in the longer term, I'm optimistic, but I'm more concerned in terms of the financing, like what happens, because
Right.
the Fed's been doing what the Fed's been doing for 18 months or about a year and a half now. It takes about a year and a half for it to hit the economy. And, 7, 8, 9% money is really different than 3, 4, 5% money. It's a totally different world. And the
Yeah.
math just doesn't work.
Exactly. Exactly. It is going to be such a sandstorm, and we could literally 50 clients call up one day, and they can all have different situations, and you have to look at each one individually. And also, what's interesting about the real estate market is it's so inefficient. And the stock market, you sneeze, it shows up, a couple hours later, and the market has priced it. Well, in real estate. I'm thinking I may not need that space, or I might need more space, and I'll think about it some more. And then maybe in 6 months I might do that. And then in a year, then my space, or my 6 months, my space might be ready, and I still may need to grow out after that. And so you just the market, it's always lagging in commercial real estate, and so it makes it I think there's bigger opportunity there.
Now back here at the Valley, I call it kind of my Youngstown theory and around real estate, and not being a guy that knows real estate, but it's basically this. If you look at Youngstown, Ohio, a once great American city that has fallen upon some hard times, and you look at Phoenix, there's no way there's no way to value Youngstown versus Phoenix, because there's the competitive advantage of a place now like Phoenix, Arizona, or any of these really hot metropolitan areas is so much greater. Is it 2 times? Is it 5 times? Is it 100 times? I don't find a way to really value that. I mean, does
Right.
that? And so I think that the areas and the locations that are going to that have different advantages right now, if anything, they're going to be strengthening their positions relative to other parts of the country. I mean, this move that we've seen economically for the first time now. The South economically is producing more than the North. We did flipped that switch pretty recently.
Right.
Am I on the right track with that in terms of that there's
You
just
are.
you can't compare these cities anymore.
You can't. Yeah. I mean, working up in Buffalo, New York, and other really northern, in Cleveland, yeah, there's going to be some growth there, but other Midwest cities, they're going to have to be reimagined some way. They're never going to be the same, and people they don't want to be inside all day. They want to be hanging out with their families, doing being outdoors. Phoenix is a great example of that. State Farm, they put their 3 major call center service centers in Phoenix, Dallas, and Atlanta. So they were having
There you
a
go.
lot of trouble recruiting out in Indiana, and they said, you know what, we're just going to go to where there's sun. And so you're gonna see more of that, and it'll be, again, everything is cyclical, and some of these cities will have to figure it, themselves out, reinvent themselves. But you're right. It's a whole lot more fun to work in sunshine.
No question. Now, in terms of the tenants that you have that are moving in, we're talking big tenants. Not obviously. I've got a tiny little office here. We're not
Right.
occupying much of a footprint. What kind of businesses? What do you see now economically that's coming into the valley that want tens of thousands of square feet, like big tenants?
Right. So there's not that many, and if you'd ask a broker these days, most of their transactions are actually under 10,000 square feet. Maybe that's grown up to 15, but it's not like if you're in Dallas, then you're going to be walking around with 100,000 foot clients, falling out of your pockets on the sidewalk. But here in Phoenix, we're a smaller market, and so you actually are a decent sized client these days. There's a handful of, like, there's been a couple of Republic Services, those sort of guys that have they're going to build 150,000 foot new building out there, and you'll occasionally see a 200,000 footer, but after that it drops off significantly, and then you get some big tenants, maybe 50 to 100 that are more renewing. But after that, most of the tenants that are active right now are, I'd say, 20,000 square feet and less, and especially under the 10 to 15, because at that size you're just not gonna kill your business if you sign the wrong long-term lease. But at 50,000 square feet and you're not sure of your return to work program, you're still kind of nervous. But the companies that are coming back, it's all mixed for sure. Like we talked about, the fire industries, finance, insurance, in real estate. Not as There's the tech. There is some of that, but it is smaller, and so it's still in Phoenix. It's a big mixture, which is nice. It's not just like Seattle where it's all Microsoft and Amazon.
Right. And, one of the things a real positive thing that I do think will come out of the challenges that the world has had in the last 3 years, COVID first, Russia, Ukraine is another big one, is we were in this model for a long period of time where it's like, all right, let's save a penny to manufacture this, 18-cent part by doing it overseas somewhere. And now, we suddenly realize that supply chains matter, and how far flung and how stretched out your supply chain is really matters.
Right.
And friends of
Right.
mine in the private equity world, when they're looking at, businesses that actually have to make and do something and manufacture something, supply chain questions are at the front of the line, where 5
Right.
or 10 years ago might not have even been an issue, because of course we're globally integrated and there's never going to be any disruptions like that. And so you're seeing, I know you're doing office, but you're seeing this reshoring or onshoring that's happening with a number of different businesses around the country. And we mentioned TS, Taiwan Semi. I think there's something like 15 or 16 chip foundries being built in this country right now. Samsung, obviously,
Right.
like Intel active here in the valley. But
Right.
are you seeing some of that? I know it's not industrial, is not so much your world,
Right.
but are you seeing that really impacting the Phoenix market as well?
Yes, for sure. So when I first got into the business 20 years ago, the industrial guys, more jeans and boots, and okay, you're gonna have to go out, 45 minutes and go show that warehouse on a Friday afternoon. And I'm this upper class office guy, and we wear leather shoes every day. And we've done fine since the pandemic started, but it is like the industrial folks have just been hitting grand slam after grand slam, home run every day, regardless of the firm around town. And in Phoenix has been so underbuilt industrially, but million square foot tenants out there, and maybe this year they've shrunk in size 500 to 300. But that supply chain is a huge thing, and that's what's driven the industrial market all over the United States. I can tell you, any market that I go in, finding even for a 10,000 foot a flex warehouse and office user, it is tough. And so I think everyone should read, his very opinion, Peter Zion's books. But the U.S. is so blessed. We won the lottery geographically, that I think everyone's figured out that we are once you have everything here, if we can operate on just North America, we're going to be fine come hell or high water in Europe or Asia, just because we've got all the resources here. So now we need to get some of those intellectual resources over here and the materials to go along with that. I mean, I think that's why you're seeing this big push to come back, so we can maintain our independence here in the U.S. and in North America.
What is Zion's book? I don't know if I've heard this one.
Oh, it's the accidental superpower.
Oh yeah, okay, yes, I
Yeah,
have. I've not read it, but I've
yeah,
heard that book.
and Disunited Nations, fantastic book, and a great geopolitical read. I found them both fascinating.
Yeah, and to that point you mentioned, I think that there's a lot of negativity out there, and we covered a little bit, obviously, because if things are cyclical, and there's probably
Right.
going to be some issues in commercial. I think we both agree on that. But you look at the competitive advantages that this country has relative to anywhere in the world. I mean, you've got coast to coast, you got two great oceans on either side of us. So we can trade with Europe, we can trade with China. We've got not some water, not so much here in the Southwest, but we got tons of water. We've got flat land, we've got farmland, we've got a young workforce, millennials coming up. I mean, the competitive advantage is just absolutely incredible. So I think if we can, as a country, get out of our own way, which we we historically have a challenge in doing
Imagine
that.
that.
Imagine
Right.
that. But
Right.
yeah, I'm hugely bullish and hugely long on the United States. I think that that we have incredible days that are coming. Um, Last question for you. So
Sure.
who's your ideal client that you want to work with, and how do people reach you? Because one of the things that I've appreciated, I've known you now for probably 10 to 15 years. It's been a long time. It's been quite some
Right.
time.
Right.
You're always real straight in terms of you're gonna say the good, the bad, what's real and what's not. And I've always really appreciated that with you, your honesty about, integrity about what's happening in this space, in this business. So who's somebody that should be reaching out to you if they've got questions about what's happening, not even just here in Phoenix, but around the
Sure.
country in places that you're working? What's the ideal
Sure.
client for you?
I appreciate that. So across the country here in Phoenix, the easiest one and best is a tenant or user who needs help with their lease or to buy a building. And even if you're 1,000 square feet, we've got folks on our team that can handle that. But we've been fortunate to help some Fortune 100 companies, and great, doesn't have to be small, local, across the country, uh, get good deals on their space. And so you've got a 20-year veteran who really knows how to negotiate, not just process a deal. But I am confident that my clients over a 10-year period, 20-year period, spend less on their occupancy costs than with someone else who's not as passionate about the building. So that's on the user side. And if there's any Arizona watchers or institutions, and they've got class A or B buildings that they need filled up, and someone who knows how to do that and can articulate and navigate the market, those are my people.
And how they reach you?
My cell phone is 602-488-4000. And my email is acheney, ACHENEY, at Lee, Arizona, all spelled out, .com, acheney at leearizona.com.
Awesome. And Andrew, again, thanks so much, man. I always enjoy this. This is a conversation we would have over lunch one day. And I'm glad we're able to record it and share it with some listeners here. And really thanks for your time today, because I know you're a busy guy, and thanks for carving out some time out of your morning.
Great, Brent. Thanks a lot for having me. We'll see you very soon.
You got it.
Gentlemen, this has been fantastic. I have so many questions, but we don't have time. So if you're listening to this and you have questions, obviously you can reach out to Andrew. You have contact information now, but you can also email Brent, and we'll get some contact information just in a moment. Normally I ask, hey, Brent, if people want to have a follow-up conversation, how do they reach out to you? But really, I want to ask this because of all the talk that I've heard, because I have not visited you in your building. I'm not local to you. I will one day. We've talked about that. But it sounds like you're in a pretty amazing area, great office building, great location. If people want to visit you, how do they reach out and make that appointment?
Yeah. So when we talk about the Camelback corridor, and Andrew actually literally is catty corner, across, you basically throw a stone almost and hit his building.
Nice.
But there's, between Central Avenue and really, I would call it Scottsdale Road, Andrew. I don't know if that's actually the real corridor or not, but you really get between like 24th into, say, Scottsdale
24th.
Road. Yeah, and you've got just incredible shopping. You've got two beautiful malls. You've got great office space here. We talked about that, but you also have this concentration of some of the absolute best restaurants in the state of Arizona and the West in general. And so we're really blessed here. And Andrew and I also we're fortunate enough we live very close to where our offices are. And so you've got then phenomenal residential. You've got a lot of the big hotels. The Phoenician, for example, is on that corridor, and you've got Hermosa's nearby, and you've got a lot of the beautiful resorts that people, when they think of Arizona, would think of. And Camelback Mountain sort of anchors it, which is the very iconic peak that sits right in the middle of the valley. And it's every day I wake up, I walk out of my house, and I make the turn to come to my office, and Camelback Road is Camelback Mountain rather is at the end of my street, and I get to see this beautiful mountain every single day. And it's just an awesome place to live. I mean, I feel blessed every day to live here.
Yeah. Well, I have fond memories of Camelback Mountain hiking that. Brent, you and I've talked about before, but Andrew, you actually gave me some flashbacks because my wife and I met in Phoenix. And at one point we both worked in the same call center. So when you brought up call center, I had this huge flashback. I was like, oh my God, I forgot I even had that job. Yeah,
Right.
it wasn't great. It wasn't a great job. Anyway.
Yeah. I did that in college, actually. I did a call center job in college. And I think it's something everybody should do, because I used to get through the night, I would keep a list of how many people said things to me that we won't repeat on the podcast, how many hangups I got, how many people died, because you'd always get a few. It was not necessarily a current and accurate list, and it was the worst job by far I have ever had, but I think it's one that every young person should do, because it toughens you up a little bit. That's for sure.
That and food service. Yes.
Yeah.
Food service. Yeah. Waited tables in college too. And you learn a lot about human nature when you're serving food. There's no question about it.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, great podcast. Thank you so much again. And of course, our last thank you goes to the listening audience. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the Smart Money Simplified podcast with Brent Mekosh. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Brent comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. And we humbly ask that you share this podcast, rate it, and leave a review, as this actually does help others find the show. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at MP Advisors, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.